Do you have a list of questions I can
Yeah, I
read?
do actually.
Okay.
Can you give me a test? Just kind of talk for a minute, just so I can.
Want me to ask the
Yeah.
question just for okay. So tell us about your favorite daughter.
Well, our favorite daughter
Well, Pam is
naturally is
very
in
busy
Maryland.
these days. We each have a different favorite daughter.
Well, when he says
You
about
mean the one who
I don't know
used to
how
be
far
our
back I
perfect
can
daughter?
go in my memory of
Think
my
about it.
of my
Family?
childhood.
You remember your mom?
Oh, sure I do.
Okay. Do you
My
remember?
mom was I was
Did
15
she have
years.
a mom that in your memory?
The what?
Did you have a grandmother? Did she
No.
have either side?
No.
Not that you not
No.
that lived in the United States.
Well, here,
No, they all died before I was born.
Well, here, why don't you tell me about as far back as you can remember? Tell me about.
I'm
your
trying to think as we're talking. I don't know how
I
far
needed
back
to have
I
a
can
tissue.
remember.
I'm tearing.
Uh,
Could I get up for a
Here.
second?
No, here.
Oh, okay. Give me one.
I'm trying to think as far back as I can. I remember going to school. I would say I can remember back my childhood probably to 4th grade. I don't think I could go beyond that.
Earlier than that.
4th grade. But don't forget, 4th grade, let's see, 4th grade.
But did your mother tell you things? Did your father tell you?
Sorry.
Nothing would happen to
No.
the carpet.
Fourth grade, I was probably 10 years old or so.
8, maybe 9.
So my mother died 5 years later. So my mother and I were very close to each other. Out of the 13 children, my mother was close to all her
They
children.
spoiled him rotten.
But I was a baby. So I was very close to my mother. So whatever my mother did, I was involved with what she did. I went different places with her and did things. Even when we went in the car, my father, and because I was so close to my mother, I was always the one chosen. Let's go for a ride and so forth. The car could only hold a certain amount of people, because when we start going to Sandy Beach and things of that nature, we had to use a couple cars. It wasn't one car. Either Henry came up to pick up the rest of them, or Sammy. Sammy always had a car. Sammy always had a car.
So,
Are you testing or doing it?
testing.
Okay. I didn't know. I didn't know if he was doing it.
So
Well, that's good memories.
What I'd like to do, though, first of all, is tell me about your family, where they came from, and what you know about.
well, where do you want to start, her or me?
I want to start you.
All right. My mom and dad both came from Poland, which was annexed by Russia way later on in time. My mother came to this country a lot earlier than my father. Years and so forth, I don't know. But I know my mother ended up in Exeter, Pennsylvania, and my father ended up in Exeter, Pennsylvania. He came from the old country when he was about 19 years old, came there and needed a place to live, and he lived with her parents. She was a rabbi, and he was doing stove parts in those days on a push wagon, fixing stoves, going to houses and fixing stoves.
What was her maiden name? Tell their
Bransdorf.
Tell their first and last name.
Gussie Bransdorf. My mother's name was Gussie Bransdorf, and her mother. They were alive at that time, but that was not. They were not alive when I was born. Many years later. But I know the shul that my grandfather was in charge of, and there's some papers laying around here someplace.
In the car.
I can't find them in the car. I thought they were in the car too.
I'll look and see. I think I
And your father's name?
My father was Joseph Kaufer, and he worked. And I don't think they courted each other very long.
Did they meet in the United States?
They met at that house, my mother's parents' home, where he boarded. And evidently they didn't court very long until they got married, and they also lived there. Wherever they moved from there, I would think they moved to Sherman Street in Wilkes-Barre, because I think most of the other children were born out of Sherman Street. We were what do they call people that keep on moving and moving and moving? Because we never owned a home. So we moved when the house got too big or too small or out of whack, whatever the case you call it, because I was born in Miners Mills, Pennsylvania, which is almost a suburb of Wilkes-Barre. But I was the 13th, so there was quite a few births in between and so forth and so on. And that's where I came along. I came along in Miners Mills in 1928. And that's where it all started with me. And like I said, I don't remember Miners Mills. And I'm trying to think. I remember living on Jackson Street, 31 East Jackson Street in Wilkes-Barre. That's the time that I can go back. And I would think it was 3rd or 4th grade. That's the kind of the memory. I don't remember the years before that. I don't know why. A lot of people remember coming out of the womb, but I don't. I remember from 3rd or 4th grade. And I know, all my brothers, everybody was home. Except Phil. Phil was not home.
First of all, try not to look in the camera if you can.
I don't think I was
You
I?
looked a few times.
I'm looking at Terry, I think.
The other thing is, do you know...
Is it shut off now?
It's on.
It's,
Relax.
Relax, don't worry about it.
Lots of tape. Don't worry about it. Do you remember where your parents came from and
Like the
anything
name
about
of the name of in
the
Poland.
shtetl or the name of the town? Or
Wasn't it Glacow or something? Didn't you once
no,
But they both came
that's
from
the
Poland?
name of a what you call it, or they had they killed people. Glacow.
But they both came from Poland.
Both came from Poland, very close to each other, but not the same town in Poland.
And did you say that your mother's father was a rabbi?
Yeah, my mother's father was a rabbi
was
in a
his name?
Shirkut. Bransdorf
That was his first name, do you know?
was his first name. Shmuel, I guess. Let's see. Yeah, his name. My father's name is Joseph Ben Shmuel.
Didn't he marry them?
Shmuel, I think.
Didn't he
Yeah,
marry your
he married my mom and dad in that synagogue that was in Exeter.
Because you always told me that. Yeah.
What was the name of that synagogue next to it? Do you remember?
Oh, I couldn't pronounce it if I did remember it. It's a Jewish name. I don't remember.
Not like Anshe, one of those.
No, I have not Ohav Zedek. It's not that. It's AHAV or something like that.
So
There,
what was your mother's father's name?
Bransdorf.
What was
I don't remember my grandfather's, and I don't remember
It
my
probably would be
grandmother's
in that
first name.
article.
I wasn't around. I really wasn't around. So I wouldn't even know.
Do you know what year they were married? Do you know what year they were married?
No, I have no idea what year
It
they were
probably is in
married.
that
It's in that
article.
book and everything, or it is in that article. I know it's in
I got
that.
that right.
I know it's in that article.
The whole thing is in there. It's a
My
picture
mother
there.
had let's
It's
see,
the announcement
1,
of your
2.
parents' wedding. That's what the article is.
My mother had 3 or 4 sisters and a brother. Bransdorf, one brother that I know of. The rest were all sisters that also lived in the Exeter, Wyoming area. Nobody was out of town. Everybody was basically local. There's 1,001 cousins around here someplace.
Do you know what brought them to this area?
No.
How did they end up in Exeter?
The Bransdorfs? I have no idea why they ever came to this area. There was a couple of prominent ones. There was lawyers. There was doctors.
They had a lot of family in this area?
Yeah, surely. The Bransdorfs had a lot of family in this area. They're all, the older ones all stayed in this area. None of them moved out of this area. Their children did, like our children have, and your mom's children.
What about the Kaufers?
The Kaufers all were local people. All 13 of us were local.
But the Kaufers, like Joseph, does he have brothers and sisters? Or?
He had 2 brothers who were local, Abe and Sam,
Did that bring him to the area?
and my father brought him to this area. My father was the oldest of them all, and he brought him into this area.
Did he come with his parents or no?
No,
Tell me a little
parents,
bit what you know about their
his
journey.
parents died over in the old country. My father's parents. My mother's parents were from here.
Right, but your father's
My
parents.
father's parents
never
died
came
in
to
the
the
old
United
country. There was only the 3 boys, and they all came here. One had a hardware store. One had a grocery store. One was even shot right through the door. My uncle Abe
That's Bev's father.
was had a grocery store, and the local mines paid every 2 weeks, and this was the payday, and he had a lot of money in the house. He had it in his bedroom, and Mustache Mike was the name of the guy who shot my uncle. And there's a lot of stories. There was comic books written on this, and there was other stories written on it. But he just went up. My uncle refused to open the door, so he shot him right through the
The
door.
comic book was about all kinds of bad things, not funny.
Yeah, not,
That's Bev's
yeah.
father.
What was his name?
Abe.
He died when he got shot.
Yeah,
he
died
was killed.
immediately, and he had you know, like what, 4 children, 5 children, and they were local for a while and went out of town. As far as the 13 coffers, my brother Henry went out of town for a short stint, very short while.
What did your father do?
My father started off being on the wagon with the stove parts originally, but when he moved to Sherman Street, the reason he moved to Sherman Street was to become a baker. And he was a baker on Sherman Street. There was a bakery, a local bakery, and he worked as a baker in the bakery for many and many a year. And then there was a gentleman in town by the name of Major, Morris Major, and he had a meat and bologna company, and he knew my father, and he asked my father to come work for him as a salesman, and he ended up working as a meat and bologna man. And then years later, Abe Savitz, who owned American Furniture Company, wanted my father to work for him as a salesman. So he went working for him, and that was, you know, the story. But going back on the story at Major's, there was 2 brothers. My brother Sam went working there as an individual, not for my father, as an individual for Major. But my brother Bobby went working with my dad and with my brother Sam at Major Provision. And we were kids, all growing up as kids. And the funny story of all of that, Major Provision was once on Northampton Street in Wilkes-Barre. And why I was downtown, I don't know, but I was downtown. And I happened to stop in Major Provision. My dad was there, and I said, "Can I have a nickel?" He gave me the nickel. And stupid me, I put it in my mouth for some reason or other. I swallowed the nickel. So I went for the nickel, but I never had the nickel to spend because I swallowed it. And I never told my father. But it came out later on, but I never told. He gave me the nickel to spend. I never had the nickel. But that was a funny story. I'll never forget that kind of story. But those are the kind of things. We always, born and raised around all nationalities of people. My father and mother, thank God, never lived in a ghetto. They never lived with strictly our nationality or anything else. We always lived. And for the next door neighbors to blocks, and I say blocks away, loved my father and mother. My father was a baker. He not only baked for his company, he baked for us every Sunday morning. As long as I can remember in my memory, my father baked every Sunday morning. And the boys had to knead the bread on Saturday night and so forth and so on, from the oldest down to me. We had to knead the bread so my father can have the bread rise and be able to bake. And my father spread his wealth. That's why I said it went for blocks. If he had 5 loaves of bread, those 5 loaves of bread were spread over. We may not even have 1 loaf left in the house, but that was my father. He loved baking. He loved doing these. And the girls did a lot of their work with him. They helped him a lot in the house. I delivered the bread with my brother-in-law, and I delivered it with my brothers to the married ones that were out of the house. I did that as I was growing up. And this is where we got until my mother died, like I said, when I was 15 years old.
How did she die?
I was home.
Did you have a birth
All
defendant?
Maxie, Bobby, and Ray were all the single ones at home, and Sam was the single one. We're all single, but the War of 1941 happened. So Ray was in the service, Sammy went in the service, Bobby went in the service, and Maxie went in the service. So basically, I was the only one home. When my mother died, we had a sister who was married to a fellow by the name of Max Siegel. Max Siegel never could find himself as far as a job was concerned, but he did work, but he couldn't find himself any given one place where he could. And at that time, he was being a huckster on the road. Huckster was a person who went out and sold vegetables from a truck. That's what they called a huckster.
Your sister.
They didn't make a living. At that time, they had 1 daughter, which they ended up with only 1 daughter. But they couldn't really make a living for them to have an apartment and have food on the table and so forth. So the boys, plus my father, decided that maybe Bella and Maxie and Carol should move into our house, because all that was left at the house now was me and my dad. So they moved in with us. And Bella basically raised me the rest of the way. I was going to school, and when I became a senior in high school, going back a little bit before that, I had a bar mitzvah on my 13th birthday. When I got bar mitzvah, my mother was alive, she should rest in peace, and we lived on Well Street in Wilkes-Barre at the time. When we had that bar mitzvah, and my father's boss came to the house, he asked me if I wanted to go to work. I was 13 years old. And I said, yeah, I would like to go to work. So he says, all right, every day after school come in, and on Saturdays come in, which I did. So I was working from the time I was 13 years old.
What did you do?
It was I'm doing for your camera, and the business was called the Schmatta business, but in English it was a cloth business. My father was a salesman on the road, took cloth in the car, rag rugs, curtains,
American furniture.
sheets and pillowcases, called American Furniture. And they would go out and they would sell them to people. My father's territory at that time was Plymouth, and he would sell them, and the customer would pay like 50 cents a week for their merchandise.
Was it like a door-to-door thing?
Door-to-door salesman. All right. From that, I was in the store, and I would build the shelves up where the salesman every morning would come in, turn their money in, and pick up more merchandise to take on the road. That's where I was working. I stayed there from my 13th, from my 14th, my 15th, my 16th, and my 17th birthday. On my 17th birthday, by this time, everybody in the Kaufer family, except the mother and father, were in the service, including all the brother-in-laws. I decided I wanted to go into the service. This was in 1945. I was 17 in May, and I joined the service in June. and my father took me down what was then a post office, but it was I guess federal post. Well, post office are federal. So he took me there, and he had a sign for me to go into the service because I was too young. And I went into the service at that time at my 17th birthday. I was just going to be starting my senior year of school. So I only finished my junior year of school. And I went into the service. By that time, I knew your Nana. We'd been dating. We were going with each other. We had 3 years already under our belt of knowing each other and going out and dating with each other.
But he didn't invite me to the bar mitzvah.
No, that was after the bar. I said 3 or 4 years because it was 13 to 17, so it was 3 or 4 years, right? Now I went into the service, and I was very fortunate. The war ended. I got in. They knew I got in. They ended the war. So then I came home in 1946 from the service. In 1946, I went back to the American Furniture, which was my original job, and they made me a traveling manager. Traveling manager was that I went to Binghamton, I went to Syracuse, I went to Watertown, New York, and would live in a boarding house. And I worked out of there and worked with the other stores. And then we got married in 46, so it had...
No, we got graduated in
48, rather. In 48, we got married, so in 1947, I gave her a ring for her birthday. Your birthday?
You handed me the box.
Yeah. I gave her a
Here.
ring for her birthday in October of 47. And then her father called me back that evening to the store. He wanted to talk to me, and then I was plenty scared. And I got in there, and he congratulated me and so forth. It was on a good terms. And he said, how would you like to come work for me? Well, I was making good money at American Furniture, very good money for those days. But I went home to see my father, and I came in the house and I told him the story that my future father-in-law wants me to go work for him. What do? I says, I'm making 3 times the money that he offered me. What do? He says, well, you can't own American Furniture, but you can own Kaplan's Furniture Company.
It's true.
That's what he said to me. So I said, well, does that mean I go to work for my father-in-law? He says, that's what I'm telling you to do. Well, I went down, I guess, or called, whatever the case would be, and I told my future father-in-law, that I would come work for him. That was in 1947. American Furniture made me a dinner. They made everybody a dinner, I should say, on Christmas, and they passed out bonuses. And I told my father-in-law I wanted to stay till bonus time, which I did. I stayed till bonus time and announced that I was leaving the American Furniture. So I came to Kaplan's, I think in December 47. Because that's when the party had to be, in December. So I came there before Christmas of 47. So that's when I start working for Kaplan's Furniture Company. And it went on for the years of this. At
Can
this,
I talk now?
Right.
Well, yeah. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to come back to you, Pop-Up.
Go ahead.
So at that time, my father was very nervous because he said, he's coming to work for me and you work for me, because I was in the office doing the bookkeeping, and all you're going to be doing is smooching with each other all day. So we made up we didn't even talk to each
That's
other.
right.
Do you remember that? We didn't even say hello to each other
I
for
come
that
in the
period
morning
of
and
time. For that period of time
Right, I
between
came in
engagement
the morning
and
and
marriage.
I did work. We never even saw each other.
We just and he really did. He worked very
That's
hard.
how it was.
So I'm gonna go and ask you now about.
The same basic.
We'll come back. I want to come back.
Yeah,
So
that's all right.
Yeah,
Let's talk about your family, your parents.
Go ahead.
and stuff.
Well, I remember my grandparents, all four of them. My Bubby, my mother's parents, she was Bubby, Rose, and my Zadie, Harry, were beautiful, wonderful people. And they lived in New Jersey. And we would go there, my sister and I, lots of times. They would drive down, it was a long trip in those years, and stay there like a week or two. 2 weeks was a long time in the summer. And so I remember my grandfather was not lucky, and he died very young. I was about 12 or 13 years old, but I do remember him. He was a very beautiful man, quoting my grandmother, his wife. He was a handsome man. She lived a nice life, and we became very, very close.
What was your name?
Rose.
Rose, her maiden name was Dublin, but their name was Levine, my mother's maiden name, when they got married. Rose, my Bubby Rose, told me all kinds of beautiful stories that were sort of like Fiddler on the Roof kind of thing. She met him right before or during the wedding. I was told during the wedding. She met him on her wedding day, was what she told me. But later, my Auntie Ann said it was a few days before. Of course, I wasn't anywhere here. This is all stories that we were told. She said, when I looked at him, he was so tall and handsome. I was in love immediately. And it was a beautiful story. So I go back a very long time with remembering my grandparents.
Can you tell me about where they came from?
They became from Russia. They left Russia on their honeymoon, knowing they would never come back. He was supposed to be in the army. And so they went on a honeymoon pretending, but they never were going to come back. They left and went to London. And they stayed there a very short time, and that's how I was told, and I don't know how long that was, and didn't like London. It was gloomy, it was foggy, and so they picked themselves up and went to New York. And in New York, my mother was born in this country, but before my mother, my Uncle Sam was first, my mother was second born, my Aunt Shirley was the third born, and my Auntie Ann was the fourth one, and I knew them all. I knew all of them. And, of course, you know. Anyway, I'm trying to think about where I'm at.
I'd like to hear more about, like, your parents?
My mother's parents. My father's parents lived right near us, near the store. I was growing up, and we were on the store. Kaplan's Furniture was in 3 places on East Market Street during that period of time that I was growing up. And we moved. And then we didn't move a lot, not like the Kaufers, but the store moved. And we stayed with the store. Either we were living behind it, above it, or above it.
These are your father's parents?
My father's parents had nothing to do with the store. Before my memory, before I was born, my father had a tire store, and the picture of that is in the office someplace there, unless unless you gave it to us back. I don't know. The picture of the tire store. It was fixing and bicycles and tires, and he did that with his brothers. But that didn't take too long. That didn't work out too well, and my father went into the beginning of a furniture store. My mother had a hat store.
What happened there?
The light went on.
Yeah, the light went
It's
on.
on a timer.
Can I
Do
shut
you
it
want
off?
Shall I shut it off?
I'll shut it off.
Should we keep talking, or is the camera
No,
on?
I just want to shut this off.
Okay.
See the timer?
Say the last names
That's
like
it,
the light
yeah.
names
Okay.
of the Dublin, but Harry Levine.
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's like nice to have
Yeah,
those
yeah,
names, all
okay.
those names. And then like where
So
your
wait,
where Poppy's
You know-
parents were from
Is that
too.
automatic? That
Okay.
Yeah.
country.
Yeah,
That's all right, I'll
okay.
fix
You know
it.
what? I'm getting
I
a little
know.
excited.
No, it's
That's
okay.
okay.
Yeah.
You're doing great, Mom.
The
Mom.
heat, you want to shut the heat off?
Can I shut it off?
The
Yeah,
heat?
shut it off.
Where's the knob?
Oh, it's in the dining room.
The heat?
You can?
Yeah,
Just put
it
half
keeps
hour.
going on and making noise.
I can hear it in the microphone.
Oh. All right, it's on the wall.
Put the light on there
Put
and
the
you'll
light
see
in the
it.
dining room. You'll see it on the
I
wall, the
can go.
thermostat.
What?
wave, Ryan. Tricky.
You guys are doing great. It's awesome, isn't it?
I didn't know what that was, the sound.
Oh, the heat?
Yeah, I didn't know what it was.
They pronounced it Dublin.
Dublin?
Dublin.
Well, then
yeah.
you should say
Yeah.
that.
I keep thinking of it as Dublin because that's my tease. That's been my tease. We used to tease Bubby
Wait,
about
he
that.
gets back.
We should say these
Yeah.
things.
We used to, who is it? Is it you?
I think it's Stacy.
It's Stacy.
One of them was caught up in the thing.
Can't be Stacy. I don't have.
You.
There's a girl.
Stacy?
Oh yeah, I have
There's two girls.
Stacy.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's Mallory and Skylar. I don't know.
No, yeah, Stacy's on one side and Mallory's Skylar's on the other one. So what made me say I don't have Stacy? Anyway,
Wait, he starts again.
yeah.
Okay.
Go
So you were
ahead.
telling about your mother. and
My mother's parents. What can I go
Just
Their
say
name
about
was
the
Dublin.
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 How they pronounce
They
it,
pronounced it Dublin. The name, my grandmother's maiden name was Dublin. My grandmother then went on to bring all of her sisters. She had 3 sisters to the United States, but she never saw her parents again, and that they didn't want to leave Russia. Russia was in the period of time when there were pogroms going on all the time. People were being killed. They were being pushed from one village to the other, like Fiddler on the Roof. And Bubby told me about all that. I mean, she was growing up and she was very young when she got married. So now my father's parents, we also knew. My grandmother, Sarah Kaplan, was always sick, and my memory of her is just oy vey. She didn't talk English. I don't remember her talking English, but my name is Helene, but she couldn't say that, and she was the one with Hinda, and so I became Hindy. She really started that, Hinda this, but always with a little tear. My grandfather was wonderful, and he knew Irv. And he was the shamus in the shul at the Anshiamus, and his name was Isaac. And so we didn't name any of our children for him because Irv and my grandfather had the same Jewish name, and it just seemed like not to do that. So now he came to live with us for a short time. And died in our house.
With your mother and father, not with us. Yeah.
With my mother and father and my sister and me. He was very sweet. He was the shamus in the shul, and he loved Irv, and Irv would come over and give him cigarettes. Do you remember that? Yeah. And he loved Irv, and he was very, very kind, and eventually he passed away. There are some things I don't.
Tell the story about he take you to the bank.
Oh yeah, should I tell that?
Certainly.
He said to me one day, Hinda, come on with me. I want to take you someplace, and he didn't drive. So I said, okay, where are we going to go? He said, we're going to walk down the hill, with Stegmeyer's Hill, where we lived on top of the hill, and we went to the bank. And he said to the man or whoever at the bank, I want to open an account. And that's when he had to tell them, I'm Helene Kaplan, and he gave me all the money he had in the world, which was $600. But in that time, that was a lot of money. He wanted it to be for me. When I was a senior in high school, he took sick, and he didn't make it. They closed him, and he.
Don't forget about the money I send you.
Do you want me to tell about that?
Why?
Anyway,
But this was your grandfather?
this was my grandfather Kaplan. Isaac Kaplan. I can picture him. He didn't like the funeral home. He always had a bad taste in it. He just didn't like it, and so he used to say about not wanting to ever be there. And so my mother said he doesn't have to be there, and he stayed in our house, and the funeral was from our house.
I think it was because he was a Kohen.
He was a Kohen, but he always, he
think
would
that's
say
why
it
you
to
don't wanna
me
go to the
too,
funeral
like,
parlor.
the funeral parlor, he just didn't want, that was, so one of the sweet little old Jewish men in the Heights came and sat with him all night, because there is I don't know if it's in the law, but there is a thing about that, and he stayed with all night, and we were sleeping in the house, but he was so kind, and eventually that became my room, because I loved him, and he cared about me very much. And then after we got married, that became our room until we were able to get an apartment. I'm jumping around.
Where was this house?
The house was 208 East Market Street, the last store before we moved to where the store is now on Mundy Street.
It's in the Heights.
East Market Street, the Heights.
So you guys lived in the store.
We lived
Yeah.
beautiful apartment behind the store, yeah.
So that's what you didn't say.
We lived behind the store. Every place I did earlier, every place we lived when I was growing up was behind the store or above the store. One of the houses was up the steps. We had an apartment. Always had very nice apartments. That last one became part of the store eventually, but that was a lovely high ceiling, beautiful apartment. My room was big and beautiful. And when Daddy and I got married, we used that room until we were able to get an apartment. And there were no apartments to be had for love or money, but Poppy, not Papa, Poppy, as he became known to all of the children as they were being born, knew some people with apartments. And so we were able to get, and I was pregnant, a third floor walk-up. But that was not unusual in those days, and loved it, and Gloria was born.
And where was it?
It was on Academy Street in Wilkes-Barre. It's still there. The apartment building is still
288 Academy, I think.
164.
288, isn't it?
How did your father get into owning his own business?
All right, I'll tell you about that, because he actually went from that tire store into appliances. And so he sold all kinds of appliances, refrigerators down to toasters, radios, and he knew how to fix. He taught himself how to fix things from the Popular Mechanic magazine and other magazines that he would buy. And he would show me. Many times he would say, "Come here, Hindy," and stand behind me. "I'm going to show you how a refrigerator works." And he would show me how the whatever goes around, and sometimes I don't remember anymore, but he actually showed me and told me it all. And it helped me in high school one day, because I was called on, because he probably was showing me because it was in the book. We had a study about it. I was called on, and I stood up and I said it, that the whole room got quiet. I was so excited and happy that day. But that was, I was already about a senior. We were already a thing, and I probably told you about it at that time because I was so excited. So it was appliances and radios, and what happened is when the war started, there were no more refrigerators, there were no more appliances, and so that's what started the furniture business. He got a few things, a couple of kitchen sets, a couple of chairs, not too much, but catalog books. And he became the first discount merchant. But we can't do anything, we can't prove it. But he would say to people who came into the hat store, the stores were side by side. They were separated with room dividers. My mother and father would get into there. At that time, they had the first van, because it was really a car that all the seats would fold down, and he had to actually have a truck license for it, which he loved the idea because it was so unusual. So they would drive into New York to buy merchandise for Mama Lil's. Is that all right? Mama Lil's hat store, and she would make the hat. She would buy all the parts, what do you call it? The hat, the parts and the feathers and the flowers and the ribbons. And she had big, deep drawers, and I loved to play in that place because the feathers were like an Indian. I used to like to dress up like an Indian. Anyway, but she would say to the people coming in, somebody would come in to buy a hat, and the lady might say, and we would hang around there, and we would get paid a penny if we would hang up all the hats on those tall hanger things. She would say, "Oh, your daughter is getting married. Is she going to be needing furniture?" My husband will give her a good price. You tell her to come. It was the same door, but one side was the hats, and the other side was the appliance store. And it's very, very clear in my memory.
Where was the store?
257 East Market
Right
Street.
up above where the
It isn't
208.
there any longer.
This
It
is
is
the Heights? This is
the Heights. We were renting.
He
We were
was-
renting that. The first store before that was right next door to Lenowitz's. None of this exists anymore. It was two stores. The Lenowitz was on one side, and we were on the other side, and the apartment was behind the store. Then we moved to that, and I remember the people who owned it. And anyway, and we moved to that one, and the apartment was upstairs. And then my father had a chance to buy this building. The building had originally been built by Klein Candy Company, and it was built so they were going to build apartments above it. It was built a very strong, beautiful building. And the price was very good. My father was so nervous. And I remember that day because we went to the movies. The movies were like 15 cents then, maybe 11 cents. I'm not, it was very, very cheap. I was at the movie in town, and I called on a pay station, which was the nickel, to ask my mother what happened. Did he buy it? And she said, "Yeah, we own it, and we're going to be moving there." I was so excited. And I was a teenager. Do you remember that? Because we knew each other then when we did
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Did you help us to move?
I went in the service
Yeah.
that year.
Oh.
There was 2 houses behind there.
Oh, so
yeah.
we had two little houses that were rented, so there was an income from it, and it was going to be a wonderful big store with a basement. And so what happened even before we moved in is someone in one of the houses was smoking and fell asleep with a cigarette. Nothing happened to anybody except it burnt down, and the insurance was paid, and it paid my parents almost enough to pay off
The whole building.
for the whole building. I never told you that story.
Then
That's the
another
building.
story of that building was when her father came into that store, the basement was flooded. It was just like having a flood from, any one of the floods. The whole complete basement was flooded. And nobody did anything about it. They sold them the building and everything else because they couldn't clean this basement out. Well, her father went down and put his high boots on because he was a fisherman, and he went down there in that basement. He was looking for the drains, where the drains would be in the basement, and he found out they were blocked. They had them covered with something and blocked the drains. He opened the drains up, the complete water drained out of the
Yeah.
basement.
And I don't
The-
even remember that.
They were absolutely beautiful basements. We had furniture down there. We fixed it up. We put walls on one side of it, and we had furniture. We had kitchen sets, everything else down there. We used those basements and then we built a second floor onto the first floor, right?
Yeah. Then we built the second floor because the building was prepared to do that.
And that's when Uncle Marv was coming to the store because my father-in-law came to me and he offered me a partnership in the business, 50% for me, 50% for him. And I asked him, we were sitting in the kitchen, he asked me to come in and have a cup of coffee with him. And I said to him at the time, I said, "What happens to your other daughter? If you give me half, what do you have left for her?" And he says, "She'll have my share." I says, "In other words, I'm going to work all my life in this business, and when the time comes, God forbid, I'm going to have a partner that never worked in a store. And he said, yeah. I said, no, I don't want a partnership. Keep it. I'll work for you. I like working for you. And I continued working for him. That's how it was. And then Aunt Marilyn married Marvin. And he had a store of his own, whatever you want to call it. It was a store. He worked. And,
I don't want this part.
huh?
I don't want all this stuff in this.
It's
But
part of it.
it's part of the life.
I do want to talk about your sister Sandra. Sandra.
I remember her.
I think you should talk
Well,
about
here,
But-
can we,
Mm-hmm.
were you still going to talk about more?
No, I just wanted to say how Marvin got up to the store. He came up working at the store.
Talk about that a little bit. Then I want to go back to.
Yeah, all right. That's how Marvin became a partner. It was a partnership between Abe Kaplan, Irv Kaufer, and Marv Stedman. That's what it was until Pop died. And then Marvin and I became the owners of the store. And we took care of my mother-in-law for all the years that was necessary.
All right.
Huh?
How
No,
about
I don't want
how,
all that. I really don't want all
How many
that.
years did you work in the store before Poppy asked you if you wanted to be a partner?
It was. Mm-hmm.
8 years.
He remembers all that better than I do.
8 years. That's when Marv came. I had 8 more years in the store than Marvin had. But I was working there 8 years.
Marvin had his own store in Edwardsville.
So did he close that store when he?
He
He's-
closed that store. He brought the merchandise that he had in that store to our store, which was linoleum and paint. And we added it to part of the stuff that we sold in our
You know,
store.
linoleum was like they were rolled up and you put it on the floor.
Yeah, I know. I want to know more about your parents.
Go ahead.
My mother and father wanted to have more children. They had had a child before. I was the oldest, but I was not the firstborn. They had had a baby boy, and we heard the stories many times. Something happened in the hospital. The baby was born perfectly normal in every way, and something happened to the baby in the hospital care. Today it would have been a big lawsuit, but they just let it go by. However, my father insisted, and in those days, husbands did not stay in delivery rooms, but my father was in the delivery room from then on. When I was born and when Marilyn was born, and my mother tried again and had another baby, and her name was Sandra, when we were teenagers, old enough to remember and help with the baby. And but before penicillin was readily available. And the baby at 9 months old got sick and didn't make it, and she died. And so my mother kept trying after that to have another baby, and she was having problems and would miscarry. She would get pregnant and miscarry. And then it stopped, and then she was sick from that and had to they had to to take care, operate on her.
The first
Mhm.
older brother. Do you know anything about it?
No, the baby never came home from the hospital.
I wanted to ask you about how your parents met, if you know.
Oh yeah, that's a wonderful story how
I
my
never heard
parents
that.
met. The Liebermans in Wilkes-Barre were cousins to my mother's family, but we never really got very close to them. But we always knew when we would tease and say, "Hi, cousin," and I don't know how they were cousins. They invited my mother as a teenager to come to Wilkes-Barre, which she did.
Where was she living?
Either New Jersey or New York, and I'm not positive about that part, but she was like 17, 16. She was a young teenager. And so they had a party to introduce her to the young Jewish people in the area, and my father was invited. And that's how they met.
How old
And
was
he took one look at her. He was 5 years older than her. When they got married, my mother was 19, so this had to be a year or two before that, because he courted her 14 hours driving time. There was no major highways, and the mountain was here, and cars were like you see in the movies. And he was smitten, and he was in love with her, and there was nothing. He just brought her to Wilkes-Barre.
Yeah. Going back a little bit,
That's how
her
they met.
father's parents were born in the old country. Her father was born in the old country.
My father, yeah, they brought him over. They were married, and he was born in Lithuania, which was part of Russia. When he came over here, he was 4 years old. And then they had 2 other sons, but they had other children who didn't make it. They had twin daughters. Did I ever tell you that, Terry? Yeah. Before my father was born in Lithuania, and so we didn't know, but they did have twin girls, and then my father was born, and after that, my Uncle Joe was born, and after that, my Uncle Edward, who we called Abby. He was my Uncle Abby, and he was very close with me. For a lot, growing up, he taught me how to ride the 2-wheeler. He took me places, and he was a very friendly uncle. But he went in the service, and then he got married, and they lived in New Jersey for a while, and they had 2 children. They had a son who is Ira Kaplan, who should be 55 years old now. It was a year before Gloria was born. And then they had a daughter who we never saw. I never saw my uncle again, although we were in touch by telephone. He had problems and was in the VA hospital and died young.
What about what are your parents' names? First of all, I didn't get.
My mother is Lillian. She was Lillian Levine, and became Lillian Kaplan. My father was Abraham. Abraham.
They called him
Abe.
Abe.
Yeah. And my father used to like to go fishing. He didn't like to be dressed up. He would be wearing jeans now, but they were khakis then. He wore khaki, and he wore shorts way before they were really popular, but they were fishing clothes. And they liked to travel, and they did. And they traveled across the country twice with a trailer hooked to their car that they would sleep in.
Was this before you were born?
No, this isn't all my memory.
No,
No,
we
I
got
was
married.
We were married already. And we had Gloria, and
He
they
quit
decided
working for Kaplan's Furniture.
we moved in. We were living in an apartment or wherever. No, we had our house in Kingston. We had our house in Kingston when we moved into their house behind the store, so that they could go to Florida.
Yeah.
They went to Florida with the little trailer.
And we weren't allowed to leave the store alone, so we had to move out of
So
our
we
house
moved
and
in-
move
we
up
moved
there
in
with our kids.
With all the
I don't know if you were,
stuff. No,
really?
it was
Just Gloria?
one baby at that time.
Just
One
Gloria?
baby at that time with all the stuff. And what else? What
I
else
want to
do
hear
you
about your
think?
mother. I want to hear about your relationship with your mother and your father.
I was close
Okay.
to my mother. I was close to my father. Was very strict. He didn't believe in mixing in and raising the kids, so my mother did it. And then it happened to me. My husband didn't believe in him mixing in raising the kids, so I did it. So I guess I was like my mother. My mother was very sweet. If my father hollered at us, she would make it up. If he said, no, you can't have a nickel, because a nickel was a lot of money, and then a dime was a fortune. My mother would take us, Marilyn and I, out on Sunday. He would be working to fix. He was fixing things for pay. He was fixing radios, whatever. People didn't throw everything away in those years. People fixed things. And she would take us down to Perugino. We would walk all the way down to town. We would go to the Irving Theater, or there were a lot of theaters in downtown Wilkes-Barre in those days. And then we very often would walk into Perugino's on South Main Street for their minestrone soup. I remember it being very cold. I was always cold. No matter what the winter coat was, it wasn't warm enough, and we were walking all over. My mother always wore a hat, and I remember one time we were on Stegmeyer's Hill, and we met a lady who was going down, and we were coming up Stegmeyer's Hill after doing this movie and thing, because we did it very often. And she said, "Oh, Mrs. Kaplan, I love your hat." And she said, "Well, you know, I have these hats in the store. Come in the store." "No, no, I want that hat. I want your hat." And my mother sold it right off her head on Market Street. Can you imagine anybody doing that now? The most expensive hat was $2.98. Most of the hats were a lot cheaper than that.
How did she end up starting that? Like, how did
My mother worked in New York. She was a young girl, and she was in charge of 17 people making hats because she got married when she was 19. So she had to be younger than 19, out of high school. She graduated high school, out of high school, and she got this job in a hat factory.
But that's what her grandfather did.
Her
My
grandfather was in the hat business, and my Uncle Sam did hats, but they always worked for somebody else. They never owned any hats. My Uncle Sam, my mother's brother, was making so many original hats. I had a little Tammy in every color that was in the fashion magazines, and my Uncle Sam never got credit for it. The company he made it, that he was working for, they got credit for it. But that was the way it was. So my mother worked in a hat factory, but she knew how to make hats.
When she moved to Wilkes-Barre?
When she moved to Wilkes-Barre, she immediately opened a hat store, and it was shared.
What was the name of the hat store? Was it?
Kaplan's.
Hats in those days, you have to understand
Kaplan's, yeah.
the hats that she
Millinery.
made weren't on a sewing machine. They bought these frames, which was hat frames, and then from the hat frame she made a designer hat. Every hat she sold
Was handmade.
a original design
yeah.
by her.
She would put on the ribbon, she would put on the flower or feathers. I mentioned it a little earlier. And they would go down, and when they went into New York and they would stay overnight, my cousin Ruth Kaplan, who lived across the street in a high-rise, an old-fashioned apartment building, would come and stay with my sister and I, and sort of watch the store, both sides.
Did she make hats even after, like when they were retired and stuff? Did she make hats for you? And I don't know, was it a hobby of hers, or was this?
Oh yeah, we all kinds of. She was making. Then she started making beach hats that you could put on over rollers, and so you could walk the beach.
He's talking after he had the furniture store. She stopped making the hats.
No, but I mean, is it a hobby? Was it a hobby? Something that
No.
she enjoyed?
No, she didn't do that.
No.
She bought her own hats in the stores like normal people.
Yeah, no, she stopped.
Talk
when-
about the cottage.
Oh, about the cottage. I forgot all about the cottage. Is this getting too long?
No.
And you're going to take some out, I
Yeah,
hope.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
What it is,
We
but
can
I-
edit what he
Yeah.
has to.
Well, when I got pregnant the first time with Gloria, my father decided you cannot raise a baby and not have a cottage at Harvey's Lake. So we said, okay. So he went out to the lake and bought a lot. And then he had construction, just what is it called?
Foundation.
The foundation put in by professionals. And then
He put me to work.
and then Irv and huh?
What my
Where
father,
did it tell where he got the
what
the
my
building
father-in-law
plans?
did, he got the
Oh, the
foundation.
building plans were because you remember this, Jim?
No,
Oh, I
was-
told. No, I remember. You remember me telling you that.
What's-
I started. The Times Leader would have once a week or so a house plan, and you could send for a quarter. I think it was really expensive. It must have been a quarter. I remember it being a little expensive because money was different in those days. You could send for the house plans. So I kept watching them, and then I found this plan that I loved, and I thought I'd love to have this house sometime. So I sent for that plan, and that became our cottage. That was the cottage.
And her father,
So
we got
Earth-
the foundation put in. He didn't believe in spending another nickel than he had to spend.
No.
So what he did, there was a store downtown.
A school was being torn down.
No, it was a house next to Boston store.
Oh, that's right.
Downtown Wilkes-Barre that was being torn down. This is when they were going to put their garage, the parkade or whatever you call it there. It was next to the Elks building. It was going down, and he went and made a deal with the people that were tearing down the house to buy all the doors and windows out of this house that was being torn down. And we bought them. He bought them because I had nothing to do with it at the
And the
time.
truck?
But our truck, which I was the driver of, took it out to the site, the lot. And then we started a
It
little
was
bit of
also-
work.
He
and
also
we,
bought a lot of lumber from a school that was being torn down. And everything, all of the lumber was secondhand lumber. And Dad,
we had a customer.
Irv and Poppy were building the house, and I was reading Gone with the Wind all winter long. A potbelly stove he put in there to heat up the place because it was freezing. And Mama Lil was there to make sandwiches, and I was blazing.
But we
lamb-
also had a person working for us, Pete. He and I was pulling nails out of all of the secondhand lumber so it can go. But Poppy knew what he was doing. We had a customer that was in the construction business. They asked him how much he would charge to put the framework up because now we had the foundation. And he decided to put this building so high that it was impossible for us to get up to do a roof. So he had this customer, gave him a deal, and he put the roof on and he put the framework. And then he, Pete, and I went from there and did every stitch of work from there on.
Built the cottage inside.
Outside, inside.
Yeah,
The
outside,
framework.
inside. We would go out there every
We put all of the outside
Sunday.
covering on that building. We put the windows and we
The
put
store-
the plumbing and we put the electrical work.
In those years, nothing was open on Sundays. There were laws about it in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and the stores were closed. So every Sunday we would go out there. And I was pregnant, so I would sit there
Pete
reading
and I
on,
used to
and I
do it at
remember
night.
reading On with the Wind.
Pete and I were nailing up walls at night with he had lights like you're showing right here. This is the kind of lights we had in there, so we can do the walls and do
And he
everything.
would light up with the
19
oil.
After
1949.
12-hour shift,
If Gloria
David.
was born in 1950, yeah.
Can you say that? What year was it? What year?
It has to have been 1949.
that's when we started construction. It was just built when Gloria was, just finished when Gloria was born.
It was finished when Gloria was born.
So it took you like about 9 months or longer?
When we
8,
moved,
6, 7, 8 months?
well, constantly, every chance we were there, and I couldn't stand the coldness of it. I remember and the paint smell and all that. But I sat there.
I used to change tape.
Mm-hmm.